Bismarck, considered by most naval experts to be the most perfectly equipped fighting ship in the world.
It was a very big ship. When you get on this ship, nothing can happen to you. Everyone believes she was unsinkable, so you felt safe.
It began with a silence so deep it felt alive. Nearly 5 kilometers beneath the freezing Atlantic, where sunlight dies and the pressure could crush steel like paper, an underwater drone drifted through the abyss. Its lights cut through the blackness, thin, trembling beams swallowed almost instantly by the cold void. For hours, all it captured were empty frames of silt and shadows. Then a shape emerged, a colossal outline buried in darkness, its metal ribs twisted but unmistakably human in design. The team on the surface fell silent. Their monitors flickered as the drone's camera steadied itself. Slowly, through the drifting clouds of sediment, a name came into view, one that had haunted history for over 80 years. Bismarck. For decades, the final resting place of Nazi Germany's most feared battleship was a mystery, a ghost story whispered among sailors and historians alike. The ship that had once defied the entire British fleet now lay entombed in black water. But what the drone saw that day did not just confirm the wrecker's location, it raised disturbing new questions about how she died. Was the Bismarck truly destroyed by British firepower? Or did her own crew, realizing the end was near, choose to sink her themselves to erase their ship from enemy hands forever? The deeper the cameras went, the stranger it became. Whole sections of the vessel stood eerily preserved, as if frozen in the instant of her death. Gun turrets pointed toward an invisible horizon, and twisted ladders reached upward like arms trapped beneath the weight of the sea. Every rivet, every torn plate seemed to whisper the same question: what really happened here? The mission had started as a routine documentation of a historical wreck, but when the sonar feed began returning anomalies, large voids beneath the hull, sealed compartments that shouldn't have been intact, and heat signatures where there should be none, the tone aboard the research vessel shifted from curiosity to unease. It wasn't just the wreck they had found, it was a story still breathing beneath the ocean floor. And so as the drone hovered before the bow of the Bismarck, its light trembling over the ship's rust-red hull, the past began to speak again. This wasn't merely the discovery of a lost battleship, it was the unsealing of a war that refused to stay buried. From the moment she was launched in 1939, the Bismarck had been more than a weapon. She was a symbol of an empire obsession with dominance. Her power terrified the seas, and her end marked the turning point of a global conflict. But beneath the wreckage lies something more profound, a mystery that modern technology is only now beginning to unravel. Tonight, we follow that mystery through forgotten archives, eyewitness accounts, and the mechanical eyes of machines that dare to descend where no diver can survive. Because somewhere in those dark corridors of twisted steel lies the truth. And what the world saw when that drone reached the wreck of the Bismarck was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. When the world learned the Bismarck had finally been found, it felt as if a ghost had answered its name. The man behind the discovery, Dr. Robert Ballard, the same explorer who had located Titanic, set out in 1989 to solve one of World War II's last great mysteries: how the most feared battleship in the Atlantic truly met its end. Aboard the research vessel Knorr, Ballard's team carried technology decades ahead of its time. Their secret was Argo, a torpedo-shaped camera sled that hovered just above the ocean floor, sending live footage through miles of fiber-optic cable. It was humanity's eye in the deep, our first true underwater drone. For more than a week, Argo swept across the seabed in precise grid lines. The control room pulsed with the rhythm of sonar pings, each echo vanishing into endless black. Hours passed, nothing but silt and silence, until a shape appeared. Metallic fragments, then twisted steel, then a curve so vast it filled the monitor. At 4,791 meters below the surface, the bow of the Bismarck rose out of the darkness, still upright, still defiant. The crew erupted in disbelief. After nearly 50 years, the Atlantic had surrendered its secret. The ship lay perched on the slope of an extinct volcano, preserved by cold and pressure. Even in ruin, she radiated power. When Ballard deployed the submersible Alvin for a closer look, the team descended into another world. The Bismarck's armor, 12 inches thick, still gleamed faintly beneath rust and marine growth. Giant turrets rested where they fell, their barrels pointing into eternity. The vessel seemed eerily intact, as though she had simply drifted to the bottom instead of being torn apart in battle. What Ballard found contradicted everything historians believed. The hull's central armor belt was nearly unbroken. No massive holes pierced below the waterline. The stern had ripped away, likely during the descent, but the main body of the ship remained whole. To Ballard, it didn't look like a warship destroyed by enemy fire. It looked deliberately sunk. The images sent back to the surface mesmerized and unsettled viewers alike. Here lay the pride of the Kriegsmarine, her nameplate still visible, her decks eerily preserved. The ocean hadn't devoured her, it had entombed her. Every rivet, every twisted beam seemed to whisper of the men who went down with her, trapped forever at their posts. As the Nore turned for home, Ballard knew his discovery had solved one mystery and opened another. The Bismarck was found, but the reason for her death remained hidden in steel and silence. And so the world's fascination deepened. What force had truly brought down this giant of war? The fury of the Royal Navy, or the final desperate hand of her own crew? The world finally knew where the Bismarck lay, but it still didn't know why. As we descend deeper into the unknown, one thing becomes clear. History still hides more than it reveals. If you're drawn to the mysteries the world refuses to surrender, subscribe to The Forgotten Depths and keep exploring what others have long forgotten. 12 years after Ballard's discovery, new eyes returned to the deep. But this time they weren't human. They were machines, sleek, intelligent, and armed with cameras sharp enough to pierce the blackest water on Earth. In 2001, a joint expedition of engineers, historians, and deep-sea specialists launched a new generation of underwater drones toward the Bismarck. Unlike the bulky camera sleds of the 80s, these remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, moved like predators in the dark. They could hover, tilt, and glide through corridors untouched since 1941. Their mission was simple: document every inch of the wreck and uncover what time had hidden. When the first drone descended, its floodlights cut through the dark like headlights in fog. The wreck came alive in surreal detail: the twisted command tower, mangled gun turrets, cables still hanging in eerie silence. Across the ship's side armor, massive scorch marks painted the story of her last battle. The drone's sensors traced the hull's every wound, mapping the ship with millimeter precision. But what the data revealed shocked the team. The armor was still almost completely intact. The scientists expected to find gaping holes from British shells and torpedoes, but the main belt, the Bismarck's impenetrable shield, remained largely unbroken. Above the waterline, the superstructure was torn apart, but below it the defenses held. It was as if the ship had fought to remain whole, defying death even as it sank. Then came the most haunting discovery. Inside one of the lower decks, the drone's lights caught a doorway sealed shut from the inside. Around it, the walls were buckled inward, signs of immense internal pressure. The image sent a chill through the control room. Had someone sealed themselves in? Or was this evidence of the crew's final, desperate act to scuttle their own ship? A year later, in 2002, filmmaker and explorer James Cameron led another expedition, armed with the twin Russian submersibles Mir 1 and Mir 2. With cameras designed for cinematic precision, Cameron and his team captured the most detailed footage ever seen. They maneuvered through the interior corridors, past shattered bulkheads and rusted passageways where time stood still. In one frame, the drone passed a corridor lined with lockers, still closed. In another, it drifted over a torn deck where a turret once stood. The silence was unbearable. The only sound was the steady hum of the submersible S-thrusters and the distant creak of a steel giant still settling after 8 decades in the dark. The footage revealed something undeniable. The Bismarck had not exploded from within, nor had her armor been completely breached from outside. The real cause of her death still lay hidden, somewhere between the scars of battle and the choices made in her final moments. Each new mission brought clearer images, sharper scans, and deeper questions. The deeper the drones looked, the more it felt as if the ship itself was guarding its secret. And somewhere in that steel tomb the truth waited, untouched, unseen, and unwilling to stay buried forever. Before the wreck rested in silence, the Bismarck roared like a god of war. May 1941, the North Atlantic boiled with steel, fire, and vengeance. The Bismarck had set sail on Operation Rheinübung, her first and only mission. Alongside the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, she was tasked with breaking into the Atlantic to attack Allied shipping lines. Her reputation preceded her, the most feared battleship afloat, armed with 8 15-inch guns and protected by armor thick enough to shrug off most shells. At dawn on May 24th, she met her fate. The British battlecruiser HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, and the new battleship HMS Prince of Wales intercepted her northwest of Iceland. The air crackled with tension as both sides opened fire. In less than 10 minutes, a single shell from Bismarck found its mark, plunging through the Hood S-deck and detonating her aft magazines. The explosion tore the ship in half. Over 1,400 sailors perished in seconds. Only 3 survived. The British were stunned. The Hood was more than a warship. It was a symbol. Now it was gone, and vengeance became a promise. Every ship within reach was ordered to hunt down the Bismarck and sink her, no matter the cost. But the Bismarck wasn't unscathed. Shells from Prince of Wales had pierced her bow, rupturing a fuel tank. Oil gushed into the sea, leaving a slick that stretched for miles, a glowing trail for the hunters to follow. Captain Ernst Lindemann and Admiral Gunther Lutyens knew their only chance was to reach France for repairs. The Royal Navy closed in. For days, it was a chase across a storm-tossed Atlantic. British aircraft from HMS Victorious attacked under moonlight, scoring only minor hits. For a brief moment, the Bismarck vanished into the fog, the ocean swallowing her trail. But on May 26th, a British reconnaissance plane spotted her again. The hunt resumed. That evening, torpedo planes from HMS Ark Royal braved freezing rain and brutal anti-aircraft fire. One torpedo struck home, hitting the rudder and jamming it hard to port. The Bismarck could no longer steer. She was a crippled Titan, turning helplessly in circles as the enemy closed in. The next morning, May 27th, the British battleships Rodney and King George V arrived within range. At 8:47 a.m., they opened fire. Shells weighing nearly a ton each rained down like thunder. For over an hour, the Bismarck endured the unimaginable, her superstructure shattered, turrets destroyed, fires raging across her decks. Yet she refused to sink. By 10 a.m., the once proud warship was a burning skeleton. Her guns had fallen silent, her deck a furnace of twisted steel. But even then, her hull refused to yield. Torpedoes from the cruiser HMS Dorsetshire were fired at close range. One struck deep, another followed. At 10:40, the Bismarck began her final descent, rolling to port as the sea swallowed her whole. Over 2,200 men went down with her. Only 114 survived. As the ocean closed above the wreck, the battle ended. But the mystery had only just begun. Some survivors swore the ship hadn't been finished by enemy fire at all, but by her own crew's hands. When the guns fell silent on that cold May morning, the Bismarck drifted helplessly in the waves, its once proud decks ablaze, its crew fighting not the enemy, but time. Yet as British ships circled the crippled Titan, an unsettling question began to take shape. Who had truly sunk the Bismarck? The official British reports claimed victory. Their shells and torpedoes had overwhelmed Germany's most powerful battleship. But when the wreck was found decades later, that story began to crack. The main armor belt, the one that protected her engines, magazines, and heart, was still intact. There were no great holes where torpedoes should have torn through, and the lower decks, though warped and compressed, had not imploded from within. It was as if she had gone down by choice. Survivors from that day remembered the chaos differently. Gerhard Unack, the ship's chief engineer, later claimed he received an order to scuttle the Bismarck. He said demolition charges were armed, valves opened, and flooding began deep below deck. Others described hearing explosions from within, not from British shells, but from the ship's own charges. Captain Ernst Lindemann and Admiral Günther Lütjens were already gone by then. Their command passed to surviving officers who swore no Allied ship would ever claim the Bismarck alive. One survivor recalled the eerie calm that followed the final torpedo hits, the sound of rushing water echoing through steel corridors as the ship's own crew opened doors to let the sea in. Another remembered seeing engineers working frantically to destroy key compartments before the ship slipped beneath the waves. They weren't surrendering, they were taking their ship with them. When Robert Ballard examined the wreck in 1989, he found evidence supporting their claims. The hull's thick armor showed no catastrophic breaches. Instead, there were smaller openings, the kind that could have been made intentionally to flood the interior. Ballard's conclusion was chilling. The British had crippled the Bismarck, but her crew had finished the job themselves. She was scuttled, he said, and she went down with dignity. Yet not everyone agrees. Later expeditions, including those led by oceanographers like David Mearns, found long gashes along the hull, wounds that could only have been caused by torpedoes. Others pointed to the immense pounding the ship endured, over 2,800 shells fired, hundreds of confirmed hits. Fires, flooding, and power failures had already doomed her. Even if the crew hadn't scuttled the ship, she would have sunk all the same. So what's the truth? The evidence suggests a haunting compromise. The Bismarck was both sunk and scuttled. British firepower destroyed her ability to fight, and the crew ensured she would never be captured. It was not a simple death, but a deliberate one. A final act of defiance written in steel and salt water. Even today, as drones drift through her dark corridors, the scars remain ambiguous, some torn by war, others by human hands. But one truth endures: the Bismarck did not surrender. She chose her grave. The sea never forgets. It keeps what we give it, our ships, our secrets, our stories, and buries them beneath layers of silence. For more than 8 decades, the Bismarck has slept beneath nearly 5 kilometers of cold Atlantic water, standing as both monument and mystery. And yet, even after all these years, she still speaks in her own quiet way. Modern underwater drones continue to revisit the site, their cameras gliding through hallways where light hasn't existed since 1941. Each pass reveals something new. A broken compass frozen mid-spin, a hatch sealed tight from within. It's as if time itself stopped the moment she went under. But beyond the metal and the rust lies something deeper, a reminder of what human ambition can create and destroy. The Bismarck wasn't just a warship, she was an idea made real. A symbol of might, of technological mastery, and of the tragic arrogance that so often defines empires. She was built to dominate the seas, and yet, in the end, she became one with them. The images returned by the drones show more than a wreck. They show a tomb of iron. Every beam and bulkhead tells a story of the men who refused to surrender, of the engineers who flooded their own ship, of officers who stood their ground as the ocean claimed them. Even in defeat, there was a kind of victory, the victory of choosing one's own end. Historians still argue about what truly happened that day. Was it the relentless bombardment that doomed her, or the final fatal act of the crew? But perhaps that's not the question that matters. The real mystery is why we keep going back. Why, after all this time, humanity still feels drawn to that silent wreck at the bottom of the sea. Maybe because the Bismarck reminds us of something uncomfortable, that no matter how powerful we think we are, nature always has the last word. In the glow of the drone's lights, the ship appears almost alive. The steel glimmers faintly, reflecting back the faces of those who dare to look into her past. And when the drones power down, their lights fading into the abyss, the Bismarck disappears once more into her eternal night, waiting, watching, whispering through the current. Perhaps that's her legacy. Not destruction, but reflection. A monument to both human genius and human folly, a story carved into metal and sealed beneath miles of crushing water. So the next time you see the calm surface of the ocean, remember what sleeps beneath it. The echoes of men, machines, and dreams that once ruled the world and were swallowed whole by it. One mystery fades into another, and every ending hides a new beginning. Subscribe to The Forgotten Depths. The next story is already rising from the dark.